What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 5 waiver wire ads. I'm doing this one the same as last week, same as the week before. I'll go position by position, then I'll rank them for waiver priority at the end. And just like the last few weeks, the cutoff is 40%. So I'm only going to mention players available in at least 60% of leagues, so rostered in 40%. Also remember that I always record this prior to the Monday Night Football game, so if something big happens there, like a major player gets injured, then just check for a pinned comment to this video. So, let's start things off with Darrell Williams. Williams is only rostered in 35% of leagues, although I'll say he's typically already owned in more competitive leagues. He played 34 snaps to McCoy's 32, so it is really an even split for the two of them. And you saw late in the game when they were going to more passing down situations, they weren't afraid to put Williams out there. So it's not like they were playing McCoy in these need to win situations. I mean, at the end of the game, Williams was the one in there getting that late touchdown on that late drive. So they definitely trust him. And with Damian Williams looking to be out for a few more weeks, you're going to have a few more good games from Darrell. Obviously be aware that he scored 4 touchdowns in his last 2 games, and no one, no matter who they are, can keep up with that sort of pace. But even if the touchdowns go away and he doesn't score any, I mean, he's still getting 11 to 13 touches a game in the Kansas City offense, and that's going to make him flex viable. So he's definitely someone you'd look to get, because anyone that's flex viable shouldn't be on free agency. Another running back is Ronald Jones, and he's right at that 40% line. It's going to depend on what site you're on. I've talked about it in the past 2 weeks in a row now, so I'll keep this one brief. He has 70 or more rushing yards in 3 out of 4 games so far, and he's actually a running back too now that he's finally scored. He also out-snapped Barber 36 to 19 this week, so maybe they're finally transitioning him into that lead role. Remember, he's only actually had 1 bad game, and that was just a little bit of a weird one, right? Because it was the Thursday night game, and we always know, don't put too much stock into the things that happen on Thursday night football. These teams have absolutely no time to prepare, so they're just throwing vanilla game plans together and just being like, go out there, try not to get hurt, try and win this game, but we don't have time to game plan and practice for this week. So I never looked too much into that. He barely even saw the field. He played barely any snaps in that game. OJ Howard wasn't even targeted in the game. I mean, it was just a weird one. It was basically the Peyton Barber show, but besides that week, Ronald Jones has been the team's best running back, and he's looked like the guy. Still that issue of not really getting any targets, so that is a problem in especially full PPR leagues, but he's the lead back on a pretty good offense, and you want that in fantasy. Honestly, there's only one more running back that really comes to mind. I mean, I looked through all of the guys available in 60% or more of leagues, and there were only 3 running backs that I would say, yeah, you should go after. There's always a chance that maybe you need running back, you can just add someone. But the only other name I could come up with was Jay Ajayi. And this is still only in a league where you look at your bench and you're like, yeah, I don't really need this guy. And whoever I add, I don't really need them to produce right now. Because obviously, Jay Ajayi can't produce right now, given that he's not on a team. But he has been cleared to play for whatever team that gets him. So let's say in 2 weeks, a team that doesn't have a great running back, or maybe there's a big running back injury, he's going to have some upside. Just know, he's not on a team right now. He's not guaranteed to ever be on a team. And even when he finally does get signed, they're not going to use him right away. So this is only an ad if you have that bench spot, you're okay with getting zeros in that spot for a month or 2 months, because he does have the upside late in the year to really pay off. At wide receiver, I'll start things off with A.J. Brown. He's now had 2 spiked weeks in week 1 and week 4. This is not someone I'd go after in a 10 or a 12 team league, but I really liked him coming out of college. It stinks that he ended up on the Titans, but he does have the talent to produce even in that offense. Right now, he's only getting 3 to 5 targets a week because he's not an every down player. Once he shifts into like near 100% of snaps, maybe he can bump that up to like 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 targets a game. That's probably pushing it in this offense. But if he's more in that 5 or 6 range, he's going to be a guy that is really nice to have on the bench. Does that happen this season? Honestly, probably not. But if you, again, are in a 14 or a 16 team league, then he's going to have weeks like in week 1 where he had 100 receiving yards, or this past week where he had, 94 and 2 touchdowns. Because he's a really good wide receiver and he has the ability to play outside and play the inside. So I do love his talent. Stinks the team that he's on. But if you're in a deeper league, he's worth an ad. Next, we have Philip Dorsett, who is somehow only available in 35% of leagues and potentially will be dropped in a few. So even if he's not available, check the transactions. That's actually something I want to talk about right here. So you guys are going to look when this video goes up on Tuesday, you're going to see who's available. And you're going to be like, all right, these guys will put a claim in for. Then you're going to check on Wednesday and see, did you get your player? You need to also pay attention to who people dropped to get the claims. We knew last week he was not going to have a good game. The Bills are very good at stopping outside wide receivers, and they're an elite defense in general, especially at home. So we knew he wasn't going to produce, but we know that he's now going to get a decent amount of targets with AB gone. So Dorsett's someone you're going to be able to start in the flex, especially over the next few weeks when they take on Washington, the Giants, and the Jets. Those are all matchups he's going to do really well in. And he saw 9 targets in a really difficult matchup this week. So if you're looking on Wednesday because maybe he was already owned in your league and someone dropped Philip Dorsett, you got to go after him. So make sure you're always paying attention to who people drop to make their claims and ads. Golden Tate is next, and he is 50% owned, so he doesn't really meet the cutoff, but I figured I'd mention him just to get your minds thinking about him again because he's been out all this season. He's now finished his 4-game suspension, so he can join the team today. Actually, he can join the team for the first time, and he can play next week. He does face the Vikings, and then he plays New England, so those are 2 pretty brutal matchups in a row, and being his first games ever with the Giants, he might have 2 down weeks, but he's definitely worth holding on to because he does have some easier matchups after that. And then he has an absolutely amazing playoff schedule. The Giants play the Eagles, the Dolphins, and Washington in weeks 14 through 16. So keep that in the back of your mind when you're doing trades or adding Giants players. And that's really it for wide receiver. We're reaching the point in the year where all the great values in free agency are starting to dry up a little bit. So hopefully you've already gotten some of the guys I've been talking about. At tight end, there actually are a few options this week. The top claim is definitely Chris Herndon, and it's not particularly close. I added him last week just to make sure I got him. When he comes back, he's going to be a top 10 tight end moving forward. And we're expecting Sam Darnold back this week or next week. Now, Chris Herndon has the 4-game suspension. And I know it's week 5, but they were just on bye. So next week, you still don't get to play him. Next week will be his last week suspended. But after that, you've got a top 10 tight end for the rest of the year with no more bye weeks. So you can realistically take him, put him in the tight end spot, and every single week, you're good there. He's going to be an every down tight end, and this is going to be a much better offense than we've seen in the early part of the year. I know they're one of the lower scoring teams on the season, but they've only had Darnold for 1 game, and when they get Herndon back to go along with Crowder and a healthy Robbie Anderson, plus Le'Veon Bell, they're going to have some really good weeks. And if you don't need a tight end, you can still put a claim in to get him. I own Greg Olsen in the league where I added Herndon. Not because I want 2 tight ends for the whole season, but because I think both of them are going to have some really nice weeks, and I'll be looking to trade one of them soon. I tried to trade Olsen this week, almost got a deal done, but I just didn't like how everything was going to turn out with it. But the point is, you can add Herndon in a league where you don't need a tight end, but maybe you need a better running back. So you add him, you wait for one of your current tight end or for him to go off, and you package one of them with another player in a trade to upgrade at a position that you need. Another tight end coming off suspension this week is Ben Watson, and I added him last week in a different league where Herndon was already owned because I do view Herndon as the better add over Ben Watson, but I wanted to add one of them because in that league I really needed a tight end. But Watson is 2.2% owned, so he's another option if you can't get Herndon. A great strategy, let's say both of them are out there. Well, don't put a claim in for one. If you've got a bench spot that you really don't want anymore, it's really not helping your team, put a claim in for Herndon, for that player, then put a second claim in for Ben Watson for the same player. So if you get Herndon, you're not going to get Watson because you don't have that player anymore, so the claim won't count. But if you don't get Herndon, then you might get Watson because now that's your top claim. I'm pretty sure everyone already knows about that strategy, but just if you don't, if there's multiple players you want, but only one spot you're willing to give up, you just put in all those claims for the same player and then just order it by the way you want them. But anyways, back to Watson. We don't know exactly how much he's going to be used in this offense. Is he going to be like a 60% player or like a 30% player? We don't really know. All we do know is that the current tight ends on the Patriots have not really produced in the receiving game. So if they plan on using a tight end this year, which honestly they might not, they're a very adaptable team. So just because they lost Gronk doesn't mean they just throw Benjamin Watson just in there into the Gronk role. No, they shift their team to different formations that maybe don't need a receiving tight end. But if they do want him to fill that role, he should have value in fantasy. And I think the upside alone is worth getting on your team. Because even if we notice in the first week or two, no, he's not really that involved, well, we can drop him. But I think the upside is worth the shot for claiming him. Because realistically, it's not like you need to be that involved to be a viable fantasy tight end. Jimmy Graham is the next one, and it looks like he's over that groin injury he suffered a few weeks ago. He's not someone that I'd really want to rely on in a 10 or a 12-team league. He's a little bit too touchdown dependent even for a tight end, and he needed Rodgers to throw for over 400 yards to finally crack 50 receiving yards. So don't get too excited about the 6 for 61 and 1 stat line. But if you're in like a 14 or a 16 team league, you need a tight end. It looks like he's healthy now, so he should be an option in those deeper leagues. You could also add Gerald Everett in a 16 team league. His role is basically the same as last year. He's the passing down tight end. Higbee's the blocking tight end. It's a super thin play in 10 or 12, and I'd kind of laugh at my opponent if he was playing Gerald Everett in a 10 team league. But as you go into deeper formats, he's viable. Not great, but he's fine. Those are really the only tight end options, but let's be honest, how many weeks are there going to be 4 tight ends that I'm going to talk about? But really, every tight end with a pulse is already added. A reminder that we never claim quarterbacks in a 1-quarterback league. If you're in a super flex league, you're in a league where you can start more than 1 quarterback. Yeah, I mean, when there's an option available on free agency, you might have to put a claim in for them because they're all already owned. But there's 32 starting quarterbacks each week, so even if yours gets hurt and you're in a 1-quarterback league, there's going to be an option on free agency. I will go over the top streaming options as usual for week 5. So I'll rank the players that are available in at least 30% of leagues. I'll kind of expand it because there's definitely going to be times where a pretty high-owned quarterback gets dropped in your league because, again, there are so many of them. But remember, so if I talk about this list and it's people who are owned in 70% of leagues or less, and you go on free agency and you see a guy that's owned in 85, 86, 87% of leagues, but I didn't talk about him, honestly, he's probably the answer, but I don't want to talk about players who are 99% owned. So here's the list. We have Andy Dalton versus the Cardinals. That's basically the best matchup you can ask for at home against the Cardinals pass funnel defense, who also has a ton of snaps per game. Assuming there are no major injuries in the Monday Night Football game, he is the top streaming option for week 5. You've got Jameis Winston at New Orleans. It looks like a lot of people dropped him after 2 bad games, but he should be owned everywhere. We've got Jimmy Garoppolo versus Cleveland, especially with their bye, giving them 2 weeks to prepare for Cleveland. I do expect the 49ers to have a good week. Jacoby Brissett at Arrowhead is next, and it's not like Kansas City is a really bad defense or anything, but they're definitely not elite. and this is a matchup where the Colts are gonna have to play catch up at some point. And Brissett, spoiler alert, is the quarterback 9 on the season. So he's actually been pretty good in fantasy, and he gets a matchup where he's gonna have to throw. We've got Sam Darnold at Philly. He's been dropped in almost every league because, any quarterback that's gonna miss a chunk of time kind of needs to be dropped. But assuming that he's back this week, then he's a great streaming option against the Eagles' terrible secondary. I mean, Philly is the most extreme pass funnel in the league, and it's not like he's coming off a knee or a shoulder or an ankle injury. He had mono. So if he's back, then we have to assume he's good to go. So definitely a good streaming option there. And then lastly, Daniel Jones versus Minnesota. This one isn't ideal, but I guess you could go there if all the other ones are taken. Minnesota has a great defense, and they love to run the ball and drain the clock, and that's just not that great for opposing offenses. All right, let's order these guys. So the order for claiming players is Chris Herndon, Philip Dorsett, Golden Tate, Darrell Williams, Ronald Jones, and then Ben Watson only if you really need a tight end. For adding, it's Ajayi, the quarterbacks, if you need a quarterback for streaming, Jimmy Graham, A.J. Brown, and Gerald Everett, with those last 3 being deeper leagues only. So, that'll do it for the Week 5 waiver wire video. If anything crazy happens in the Monday night game, then just look for the pinned comment. I put the timestamps there, but I also update it for anything that's going to happen after the video was recorded and uploaded. We'll be doing trade targets next, followed by start-sit videos later in the week, so be on the lookout for those. But that's the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.